Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. We're going to dive right into some interesting things right off the bat. So as you get logged in, I'm going to go through just a little bit of an intro here, talking about something from Dmitry at War Translated. Now, I found this an interesting read here, so I'm going to just go ahead and read and talk about it with you. Dmitry says Vladimir Putin, or rather he and approximately 30 members of the Russian elite that he represents, instigated the war in hopes of swiftly claiming victory and securing enduring glory. Their motivation stemmed from a desire to bolster their public approval ratings. This pattern echoes 1999, 2008, and 2014, all times when the Russians invaded people. Their initial attempts faltered, necessitating a full-scale investment, civilian mobilization, and a shift to a war economy. They resorted to nuclear threats, sacrificed hundreds of thousands of Russian lives on the battlefield, and subjected their own people to dehumanization, turning them into beasts. Recently, they celebrated Victory Day under the slogan, "Victory is inevitable." There was no turning back for them since February 24th, 2022. The accumulated societal tensions in Russia prevent them from simply withdrawing their troops without consequences. Despite propaganda efforts, the Russian populace is aware of the significant losses incurred. Now, these beasts need nothing more than a complete victory over Ukraine and then to Berlin. For Putin and his elite, sustaining power hinges on perpetuating crises, each larger than the last. However, their offerings of victory to the Russian populace appear meager. Avdiivka, or another farm of 15 houses that takes months of bloody fighting to capture? Moreover, they aren't really hiding their inability to seize Kharkiv with their current forces. Consequently, it seems Putin cannot fathom any form of peace, as doing so would likely trigger internal dissent. But his military is strained, although numerous. Their combat equipment shows signs of depletion. This aligns with Prigozhin's statement a year prior, indicating that capturing the Donetsk region alone would require years. Thus, they're either confident of being able to sustain a prolonged war, or they will resort to terror and hybrid warfare tactics as their only viable course of action. I can't see how the suggestion of peace is currently realistic. And this reflects the fundamental underlying problem. Us in the West, we look at the situation, we say, well, obviously everybody wants peace. It's just a matter of getting the right terms for it. But the problem is that it assumes that Vladimir Putin wants peace. You see, if Vladimir Putin truly wanted peace, he could have stepped out of all of this immediately. He could have never invaded in the first place. He could have used diplomatic means to rescue the Russian-speaking minorities in these areas and done something along those lines. And yet, every time there's been a deal that looked like it would go through, it was the Russians that broke it. So in the end, this is what we're looking at. Vladimir Putin needs the Ukraine war, not because of any value it has for his country and for his people. He needs the Ukraine war for an ever-escalating series of crises that help him to stay in power. A similar issue is what we see in the United States, that as the longer we go, the more likely that that elected officials are to invoke some ever-escalating series of crises to try and stay in power. Happens every 4 years in election season around here. Instead, we should be focusing on how to not have crises in the first place. So that's my first thoughts for an introduction today. Let's go ahead and get into some of the exciting things going on. Top of the list is Belbek Airfield in Russian-occupied Crimea. Now, this video, I don't think there's any audio on this one, as I recall. But this was a HIMARS missile attack that was carried out last night. Now, this is showing the 5/15 date, but over there, they've already gone on to the next day. They're on the 16th now. And there's additional information that you'll find very interesting. You can see the explosions here, a variety of impacts and things like that. This video is actually about 2.5 minutes long. I sort of wish I could leave it up while I read other things, but, that's not how, well, you know what? Let me pull this out here, and I can continue on looking at this while the video plays. Nope, not that one. This one. There we go. Overnight, Ukraine attacked occupied Crimea, namely Belbek Air Base. Usually, lots of aircraft are stationed there, such as Su-27s and MiG-31s. Now, this is a factual statement here. There's actually very little question, but that's the case. And so the... sorry, I got to undo a few things over here. That'll work. Okay. So this airfield was a vital structure, effectively. Now, they did report as of yesterday's attack or last night's attack that there were at least 20 explosions reported, and much more has been happening since. There was an ongoing fire as of last night, and it was the situation continued to escalate for some time. This is north of Sevastopol, with fires being seen. There were also explosions reported in Sevastopol, Simferopol, Zankoy, and Hvardishke. So this was an extensive attack on Crimea. Air defenses were active near Simferopol, and Russian report of renewed launches toward occupied Crimea. So this was an ongoing attack overnight. The Kerch Bridge was closed, and Russian channels reported that 12 missiles were heading that way, although others were reporting more like 20 or even more. So overall, we've got an interesting set of circumstances that the Russians will have absolutely already denied. So interesting to say the least. Okay, continuing on here. However, this is from today, later today. This is actually late this afternoon. Belbek Airfield in Crimea is on fire again. So they took another strike. This is means that this airfield was struck multiple times in the last 24 hours, and the losses are reported to be pretty extensive. The first attack, there was reported about 20 dead and 30 wounded. They've also reported the loss, at least initial reports, at least at this point in time, includes losses of a couple of aircraft that the okay. They've reported a Su-27 and three that was destroyed, and 3 Su-31s damaged, not destroyed, as of yesterday's attack. But, as I said from yesterday, there was many fires in the area, especially in the aprons where they kept the aircraft. So the odds are it's a lot more extensive than that. This is reportedly from the first attack on Belbek Airfield, S-400 launchers, radar equipment having been utterly destroyed. And the losses then were reported, of course, the 2 S-400 launchers, the radar, the MiG-31, 3 Su-27s, 7 servicemen for various units, and 12 others injured. But again, the numbers are being updated, so we still don't have further on it. The second attack were reported by Jason J. Smart as well. And, of course, they also report on some of the same losses that were reported. So overall, that's the overall situation in Crimea. Then, just to add a little bit of insult to injury, this was reported midday today that there was a single large explosion heard over Fruktova-occupied Crimea. So interesting, to say the least. A lot of attacks on Crimea were being reported and dealt with. Now let's go ahead and move on. By the way, if you're just now showing up, absolutely chime in. Let me know you're here so I can at least acknowledge you and say hello. So I do appreciate you guys being here already. The next big item of news, and I've got the video playing here. There'll be several videos in this section. The moment of the attack on Prime Minister Fico. Fico was attacked. There was 3 shots, one in his leg, one in his stomach, and one in his chest, as I understand it. He ended up going to the hospital in critical condition, and the situation remains in, shall we say, in doubt at this point. Here's some footage of the right after that attack. They got him into the car and immediately began responding. The man who performed the attack on Robert Fico, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, has been captured and identified. I don't think we need to go through another video of the assassination attempt itself, so let's go and keep on going. Now, Fico is not exactly a spring chicken. He's 71 years old and a native of the city of Levice in the Nitra region. Now, I know plenty of people who are older than 71. That does not make you a spring chicken if you're younger than 71. I'm just stating. Now, the reports since then have been mixed. Initially, it was reported that he was stable and conscious after a successful surgery. However, the updates have been coming in, and I'm going to go ahead and move this one down because I've got quite a few to discuss first. And the reports have been mixed. And let me see if I can find some more of them. Like, for instance, this one says he was put into an induced coma after the surgery. The overall situation then becomes, it's pretty clear that he was pretty critically injured, that the surgery was reportedly successful, and that he is likely to live, but has been put into a medically induced coma to assist with the healing process. The shooter turned out to be another 71-year-old. The shooter turned out to also be 71 years old. That doesn't seem right. What's going on here? I take it back. Fico is not 71. The shooter was 71. So, sorry, that was my misinterpretation of the data. And so the shooter was a 71-year-old man who apparently was apparently just a regular Joe, had no particular history or of violence or anything like that. The weapon he owned was owned legally, and he had been. The two different sides are reporting different information. One claims that he was a right-wing extremist with ties to a pro-Russian paramilitary group. Others are saying that he is a far leftist associated with the liberal party over there equivalent. At this point, I can't speak to exactly what this man's politics were. He did, however, make a statement that he did it because he didn't agree with the government's policies. Take your pick on which ones he was disagreeing with. Hi, Luciano. Glad to have you here. I'm always happy to see you on the stream here. And let's go ahead and keep on going. As Dmitry stated, it was, why did Russia try to killing a European politician? The Russians, of course, are pointing at Ukraine. Take your pick. I mean, we're waiting for more information to come in on this one. This is all not quite a breaking story, as it did happen quite early today. But the end result is still that Prime Minister Robert Fico from Slovakia, who has typically been a pro-Russian, okay, let me back that up just one step. Not so much pro-Russian, so much as not favorable to assisting Ukraine for various reasons. But it doesn't make sense from certain perspectives, but on others it absolutely does. And I'm not going to get into the speculation at this point in time. There's plenty of other people who are speculating extensively on this, saying it was because he was just openly hated the Slovakian leader, and everybody is contradicting themselves onto exactly why this man carried out this assassination attempt. Leaders across the world have reacted to the situation. President Zelinsky said, "This act of violence against the head of government of our neighboring partner state is to be condemned." President of the European Commission stated, "Such violent acts have no place in our society. They undermine democracy." German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, "Violence has no place in European politics." Donald Tusk from Poland. Shocking news from Slovakia. Robert, my thoughts are with you in this very difficult moment. I want to say something about this from Donald Tusk here. He used Fico's first name here. And I do believe that Robert Fico has personal relationships with many of the other leaders in Europe. And therefore, many of these people are expressing personal concern for Robert here, Prime Minister Fico. So, for instance, Serbian President Alexander Vucic stated, I'm shocked by the assassination attempt on Robert Fico, a great friend of Serbia and myself. Dear friend, I pray for you. Now, Vucic is a bit of a wild card in this one, but also more aligned with Russia than with the West. Netherlands Prime Minister, shocked that my longtime colleague was shot at. I wish him strength. My thoughts are with him and his family. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was shocked by the assassination attempt on Fico. I wish him a speedy recovery. All of these are politically expedient statements, but some of them are more personal than others. Moving on to the news out of Ukraine, I've got a few items for you today. A luxury yacht belonging to Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Medvedchuk was officially transferred to the Ukrainian state on May 15th, according to Ukraine's Agency for Investigation and Management of Assets. Medvedchuk was reportedly pretty involved in the corruption and things like that, and so it's not necessarily a surprise that this would be the case. They actually had legal situations going on to make this happen for quite some time. Figure they can sell that and buy a whole bunch of ammunition at the same time. Who knows? Maybe they can send it over to Vladimir Putin in exchange for a few more, for a whole bunch of tanks and other artillery equipment. Who knows? Ukraine managed to bring home a 17-year-old boy from the Russian-occupied territory. This would be Denis. No other reports on the situation around it. I haven't had a chance to really read into the article, but it's clear that Ukraine is constantly working to bring their youth and the young men and young women back to their home country. Bring them home. Defense Minister Rustem Umerov has dismissed Brigadier General Serhiy Baranov from the position as head of the Missile Artillery and Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Forces. Let's really quick check here, see if we can get into the article itself, see if there's a reason given. Okay, the report is that he's been reassigned to another equally important and responsible area of activity, but there was no report on exactly which position he would be appointed to. And they have not announced the replacement either. So now this division should be able to work without a top man for a while. It's just more of a question of what's going on and why the change. Hi, Al. Glad to have you here. Always appreciate you. Now, after the attack on Kharkiv, President Zelinsky has postponed all of his international events planned for the coming days to later dates. This is a good optics right here. It's good from a perspective of making sure he's available to make sure there's no issues getting equipment to the front or arranging anything like that. To head off to another country at this point in time would look really bad for him, and therefore it's good from a political perspective that he went ahead and canceled those events or postponed them. And the UkrainianSBU detained 6 alleged Russian agents accused of aiding deadly strike in the Donetsk Oblast. 5 men and 1 woman were accused of helping Russian forces direct a missile attack on a residential building that killed 10 people and injured over 80. So it was also reported that was a double tech strike as well. Moving on to the news out of Russia, and I've got a lot of stuff going today, but want to make sure you get everything. FYI, I've seen vague rumblings that people are saying that there's some big stuff going on and that they're doing the whole operational security thing. There will be a little bit less detail in our front lines today because a lot of people are exercising that, and I did draw heavily on Russian sources. We'll see what we can get out of it as well, but for now, let's talk about Russia. From the far from the Ukrainian border, a light aircraft type UAV was shot down over Tatarstan. That's about 1,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. How is Ukraine able to get these drones right past Russian air defenses and deep into the heart of their country? I swear. This is reporting back on the destruction of an ammunition warehouse in Sorokine occupied Luhansk region. It does show the extensiveness of the strike. It's pretty impressive. The Kremlin's war continues to have a profound effect on Russia domestically, according to the UK Ministry of Defense. Putin is exerting more control over its economy, bringing some 180 companies under state control since the invasion, with a likely worth of approximately $11.5 billion. By nationalizing or bringing them under state control, number one, Vladimir Putin can then give them to his ideal or preferred people and allow them to take on their grift and take on their bribes and graft. He can also bring it to more directly under the control of the state, so it manufactures what it wants, what the Kremlin wants, not what the leaders of those companies might have found the most profitable. Drones from Ukraine's military intelligence attacked an oil base in the Rostov region of Russia overnight. They do report that the damage was extensive. I don't have a full report on that, though. They say the depot was on fire, but the Russians have denied any fire took place. From Crimean Wind, and this is, I'm going to put it into the realm of opinion. Many do not agree with the open source intelligence conclusions, including the famous Ukrainian military expert Alexander Kovalenko. He made a fair point and provided some evidence. Firstly, no matter what infrastructure the enemy builds, those volumes of equipment, fuel, and people cannot be transported along the Sea of Azov by one railway. He said this is talking about why the statement that the Kerch Bridge is not used for weapons and logistics is potentially wrong. Secondly, the well-known partisans of the Atesh movement and pro-Ukrainian Crimean public pages constantly publish photos and videos of trains of Russian equipment in Crimea, but they didn't fall there from the sky. Kovalenko believes that the bridge is still in service. So, are they concealing their supplies? Are they doing some other way of getting the equipment across the bridge without it being quite so obvious? Don't know. But it is interesting. And if that equipment is showing up in Crimea before it's being sent to the actual parts of Kherson or Zaporizhia or up on the front lines, that would indicate that it's probably going to Crimea first. That could be by either boat or it could be by the bridge. And the bridge would be the more efficient of the two. Russian authorities of Crimea announced the reconstruction of the Simferopol airport, which has been closed since 2022. This is basically the perimeter fence to prevent people from walking onto the airfield. The interesting part of this is that this fence was contracted out to PJSC Mostotrest, and this is the same pool of companies that built the bridge, the Kerch Bridge. So clearly, Vladimir Putin's buddies are still getting plenty of work. All right, moving over to international. The Estonian parliament has adopted a law allowing to return Russian assets to compensate for damages caused to Ukraine, according to the Estonian foreign minister. This is taking those seized assets from Russia and using them and passing the laws necessary to use them for Ukraine. Clicky. Okay, there we go. The U.S. is considering sending another Patriot battery to Ukraine. I've seen this in multiple places. It's not official yet. It's not been finalized. I do know that the U.S. Army is very reluctant to part with any of their Patriot missile systems. And it's clear to me that if they haven't already ramped up production of the Patriot system, they, by golly, better start doing it now. There's enough people who are seeing what the Patriot's doing in Ukraine, even with as few as there are, that people are knocking our door down trying to get these things. Why haven't they ramped up that production if not? Romanian Prime Minister, which I will not try to pronounce, said that the decision on the supply of a Patriot system to Ukraine will be taken in the Supreme Council of National Defense. But the interesting thing is he was pleased with Moscow's reaction, very negative reaction from Moscow. It means that we matter, and it has fears that the world is mobilizing against the dictator Putin. And Russia did jump pretty hard after Romania announced that they were looking into providing a Patriot system to Ukraine. Really shows how scared the Russians are of Patriots in both senses of the word. Now, Blinken is a politician and a diplomat. He phrased this thing very carefully. But let me read you what the Kyiv Independent came away with here. Ukraine has to make decisions for itself when deciding how to use U.S.-supplied weapons that could strike targets inside Russian territory. We've not enabled or encouraged strikes outside of Ukraine, but ultimately, Ukraine has to make decisions for itself about how it's going to conduct this war. It's not absolutely permission to use U.S. weapons against Russian territory, but neither is it a denial. Interesting phrasing. The Pentagon reports that the U.S. is working hard to rush aid to Ukraine with the battlefield situation concerning. This means, don't know what this means exactly, but they've got plenty of pre-staged stocks over there that can start replenishing those with stuff brought from the U.S. and send that to Ukraine. And this is the interesting part right here from a variety of perspectives. The defense budget here, they've got a 2025 budget request going into play, and they have requested to retire 250 total airframes to save money for other programs. This includes things like the vaunted A-10, but the A-10 is reportedly not really what Ukraine's looking for because they consider it likely to be too vulnerable to the S-400 systems. They are, however, the U.S. is also retiring some older F-16s, some older F-15s, and of course the A-10s, like I mentioned there. So there are several that might be of interest to Ukraine if the arrangements can be made to move them over there. Now let's get on to the front lines here. The biggest thing, of course, is always Kharkiv right now. Of course, that's the area with basically the least information. Let's go ahead and just pop through the updates real fast here. Vovchansk is an interesting situation, and it has been going back and forth. You can see here that the update is still from yesterday, and I don't expect that to change because I think they're probably working on their operational security. But I've got some additional information that has been officially released. Kalinivka here, you can see that changed right there. Just another kind of open area with one road in the middle of it. And that's kind of the changes from the map today. A lot less than we were seeing in the previous days. However, that doesn't mean there's no fighting going on. At the Dnipro River axis, clashes continue near Kharkiv, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. That is an ongoing situation that indicates that Ukraine might be doing something there. Interesting to watch and interesting to keep an eye on. A Russian sabotage group tried to reach Ukrainian positions on the Dnipro River, but were taken out immediately. I can't play this for you. Trust me on that. I can't. If you want to watch it, I'll just post the link right here. Robota. The Russian Ministry of Defense has claimed that Robota has been occupied, but this is not exactly true, but the Russians have managed to occupy more area towards the center in recent weeks. But as Null Report states, this town has lost all strategic value. It has been flattened and is completely undefendable. So basically, they have to dig new trenches in order to keep defending anything in Robota. They probably will make Russia pay dearly for any advances in the area, but they will probably also have to fall back some. You can see a small chunk in Robota right there. I've got multiple sources on this one. Russian forces managed to take control over Hlybok while also trying to push west of the settlement towards Lipsy. This attempt failed. Footage emerged of Ukrainian units counterattacking a Russian DRG unit, taking them captive. And this video is something else. I'm going to mute the music here because I have every reason to believe it's probably copyrighted. This is only about a minute and a half, a little bit more than. You can see Ukrainian forces surrounding this house. The house is already heavily damaged. You can see that. But they have apparently surrounded a Russian group of soldiers here. They do initial checks on this. They look into the house. The Russians don't immediately act. Now you see the soldiers running away from this side of the house because moments later, a drone smashes into the window and blows up in that upstairs room, the likely place where the Russians were holed up. As we move forward, we see the Ukrainian forces resecuring the outside of the house and watching for the exits. You can see here that is a Russian soldier on the ground, the first one that they managed to get out, though I believe this is yeah, there it is. This is another soldier they captured, just having them come out of the house. The Russians knew that there's likely another drone on its way if they didn't come out of there soon. So that's 3 Russian soldiers all captured in this one little house by a Ukrainian group of soldiers. This video was provided by somebody anonymously that took video of this and watched the location as they were working. Now, obviously, it's partially drone footage here, so you got a pretty good idea where it came from. And finally, the Russian perspective for a little bit. Wargonzo report, not finally, because I've still got to talk about Kharkiv a little bit more. Zaporizhia fighting. The fighting continues for positions northwest of Verbova. Although not very active, the Russian armed forces do not cease to put pressure on the Ukrainian defense. No significant changes to the lines of control. Donetsk, the Russians continued to assault Hyrivka. They say that the Ukrainians could no longer hinder the advance of Russian troops, with fighting continuing in Krasnohorivka, and they have tactical successes in that area. There are also advances in Netolovo. There, Ukrainian troops were also forced to retreat closer and closer to the outskirts of the populated area. They're pushing them back into a town. In Chasiv Yar direction, the lines of control, no significant changes. And Kharkiv, the Russians report that they advanced towards Volchansk, or Vovchansk as we call it over here, saying the Ukrainian forces were doing fighting withdrawals and fighting continuing for the village of Staritsa. There's an advance of Russian troops in the area of the village of Lukyansky, also with fighting continuing in the Lipsov area. The Russian army maintains the initiative, albeit not quickly, but methodically pushing through the defenses of the Ukrainian forces. Now, this was an early morning report. Let's go ahead and go through some of the other things. At the Kharkiv axis, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, there was a clearing operation ongoing in the northwest of the town, which is the direction that the Russians were coming from. There's indications that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back. This one caught my eye because we talk about the Chinese providing supplies and equipment to Russia. This is some of it. The Chinese supplied Desert Cross 1000-3 ATV, obviously going up in flames, much like other Chinese things. Ukrainian forces, according to President Zelinsky, have managed to stabilize the situation in Kharkiv Oblast over the past day amid Russia's attempts to break through. Now, that was done in his evening address, so no operational security concerns there. Russian forces, according to the General Staff, were partially forced out of Volchansk. That does not mean that this situation isn't going to change in both directions. But this indicates that the Ukrainians have managed to regain some of the initiative in that area. Ukraine is also bringing up additional forces and equipment to assist in the situation in Kharkiv, likely their reserves in order to keep them fighting, and then get some of the troops rotated back out for resupply. Now, this is from the mayor of Kharkiv itself. At this point, Kharkiv is still a ways away from the front lines. They've been evacuating people from the directly affected areas into Kharkiv, so they're actually taking shelters here in this city. Yes, the Russians are still attacking it with missiles and long-range weapons, but there is no plan to evacuate Kharkiv itself at this point in time. The Russians do not appear to have the resources and equipment to be able to push this far south. They now report that approximately 8,000 people have been evacuated from the front lines and taken to safer places, typically Kharkiv. The city mayor there emphasized that the city is currently providing assistance to about 6,000 people who've been placed in dormitories and supplied with those necessary. The Russians, of course, stopped traffic so that they could line up their MLRS, their Grad launcher, and start shelling the Kharkiv region from a road in Russian Belgorod region. That's right, the Russians are launching their attacks from Russian territory, not bringing their equipment into Ukraine, which is a really significant change here. You see, most of the front lines, the Russians have brought their equipment into Ukrainian territory that the Russians occupy, and then used that territory to attack into the rest of Ukraine. And so the Ukrainians were able to directly attack that with Western weapons and equipment. But in this assault, they've come across the Belgorod Kharkiv line there. So they're assaulting from Russian territory directly into Ukrainian territory. And that means that they've got protected and sheltered places on the other side of the line that they can't use things like ATACMS and HIMARS and other Western weapons to attack. If they're going to kick this one back out, they're going to have to be able to attack Russian territory where Russian troops are attacking Ukraine from. This one I'm pointing out merely because it states that the current data, it appears that the front towards Liptsi hasn't been moving much for the past 72 hours, which again says that things seem to be stalling out and stabilizing on the Russians, for the Russians at this point. And this is just that same video from earlier. So that's Kharkiv itself. Good news from the perspective of things seem to be stabilizing. I have seen other reports that Russians are working on bringing more forces in to try and force things through. But we also don't see any indications that they're going to be able to actually get enough troops together to push farther into Kharkiv. So there you go. I did see something that they were destroying bridges to try and stop the Ukrainians from getting across. That's a pretty good indication that the Russians are trying to just stay there and prevent the Ukrainians from actually attacking into their positions rather than trying to capture further south. But that was unofficial information that I just picked up someplace. And that's pretty much everything about Ukraine. I've got a couple other things. To talk about. Yes, Stephen, some of the countries have started to say so. Britain in particular has absolutely given the Ukrainians authority to use their weapons inside of Russia. Any of the Russia-built weapons are already authorized. If they got tanks or trucks or something like that, or Grad launchers or things like that, they could already use them against Russian positions in Russia. But like, for instance, the U.S. has been very tight to the vest on allowing their equipment to be fired against Russian territory. Other countries have done similar, but there are a few that have said that the Ukrainians can use their weapons against Russia. I'm going to go ahead and just quickly run through a couple other news items here before I close things up. But I do want to say thank you. If you're only interested in Ukraine, now's about the time. I do appreciate you being here. Give me that little thumbs up if you would like to. And if you want to see a couple of other things, just a couple more minutes, I've got a few more things for you. The protests against the passing of Georgia's controversial foreign agents law have begun to morph into a larger sign of discontent against the government and the direction it's taking with the country. These protests in Georgia have not stopped. The authorities have been cracking down. They arrested, I think it was 18 or more people, used tear gas and water cannons and everything they could to try and disperse these crowds. But the crowds have been getting larger and larger and larger. Of course, the White House, this is from before the bill was approved. The White House says if the foreign agents bill passes, the U.S. will be compelled to reassess its relationship with Georgia. At this point, Georgia, the leadership, at least the government, probably doesn't care. Yeah, they don't want to attract too much attention, but they are aligning with Russia. And at this point in time, the people of Georgia don't want that. This is the situation in Tbilisi from earlier today. You can see thousands upon thousands of people spilling all into the streets and area right here. This is, I believe it's called Heroes Square, I think. Yeah, Heroes Square. So you see thousands of people here. We've seen other pictures of even more people all throughout these areas. It's a big thing. Now, this one, I'm going to just point it out with no further context at this point. But there's situations going on in Bosnia. And the U.S. is saying, the U.S. ambassador is saying that they're ready to defend Bosnia and won't allow a conflict to happen. I'll try and get more information on this and provide that later, but interesting to see. And I'm wondering why we didn't make the same statement for Ukraine. And then the final thing I want to talk about just briefly today, this squiggly graph full of lines is talking about how the Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels have gathered at the Scarborough Shoals, South China Sea. Now, these are islands that are controlled by the Philippines. They're absolutely they're part of Philippines islands borders. They're part of some of their controlled islands. They have done this to block access to a Philippine civilian flotilla, and this force is massive. The looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, about 25 vessels in total that China is using to blockade this tiny island that rightly belongs to the Philippines. Now that they're seeing the responses that they're getting, it's clear that these dictators across the world are taking advantage of the opportunities to see exactly how far they can push the world. And that is everything. Steve says, Georgian Dream is cagey about support for Russia. That's because the party they don't want to burn bridges just yet because there's too much popular support for the West, at least in my opinion. Many people will know far better than me on that, but from what I've researched and seen so far, it's clear that party wants to get closer to Russia, but they're trying to play it as smoothly as they can, and they've done a very poor job of that as well. And that's everything. So I do appreciate you guys being here. Thank you, Stephen, for your comments. Glad to see you, Luciano and Al. Always appreciate all three of you being here and look forward to seeing you guys on the next video. You have a good one.